I was 21 years old when I learned that love, family, and betrayal can sometimes wear the same face. My name is Audrey Davis, and though I didn't know it then, the choices my mother made for me, the choices she insisted were for my own good, would carve scars across my heart that even years of distance couldn't heal. Back then, I was just a girl in love. Mark and I had been dating for nearly 2 years. He wasn't perfect, no man is, but he was kind, attentive, and made me feel like I mattered in ways I never had before. With Mark, laughter was easy. We'd go to late-night diners and share fries, our fingers brushing our eyes, lingering. He talked about dreams, about houses with porches, and kids who'd chase fireflies in the yard. For the first time in my life, I felt safe imagining a future. But my mother never approved. She'd tilt her head, lips pursed, and say things like, "He's fine for now, Audrey. But he's not ambitious. He doesn't know how to build a family the way Elizabeth does." My sister Elizabeth was the golden one, the daughter who excelled at everything. She was a year older, strikingly beautiful, and carried herself with a confidence that made people listen. I loved her, but I always lived in her shadow. When Mark came to dinner one night, my mother watched the way he looked at me with narrowed eyes. Later in the kitchen, I overheard her whispering to Elizabeth, "He would be better suited for you. You're steady, you're dependable. Audrey is impulsive. She doesn't know how to hold a man like that." I wanted to scream to defend myself, but I froze. My hands trembled as I gripped the counter, holding myself steady while the ground tilted beneath me. I told myself she didn't mean it, that mothers sometimes said cruel things without thinking, but deep down a sick twist of fear began to coil in my stomach. The unraveling happened slowly, almost imperceptibly. Mark started spending more time with Elizabeth under the guise of helping her with errands or studying together. At first I trusted him. I trusted her. But then I noticed the way Elizabeth's laugh lingered when Mark spoke, the way his eyes drifted toward her when he thought I wasn't looking. One night I confronted him. "Do you love me?" I asked, my voice breaking. He cupped my face in his hands, his eyes searching mine. "Of course I love you," he said. "But your mother thinks—" My heart sank before he even finished. My mother. Always my mother. Weeks later, Elizabeth announced her engagement to Mark at a family gathering. My chest constricted so tightly I could barely breathe. Everyone clapped, cheered, congratulated them. My mother glowed with pride, her hand on Elizabeth's shoulder, like she had orchestrated the whole thing, which of course she had. I excused myself, stumbled outside into the cool night air, and vomited in the bushes. The man I loved, stolen by my sister, sanctioned by my mother. My family turned betrayal into celebration, and I was the only one who saw the cruelty for what it was. I left shortly after. I packed a single suitcase and boarded a bus to Chicago with barely $200 in my pocket. No goodbye, no explanations. I couldn't bear to look at Mark to see the guilt, or worse, the happiness in his eyes. And I couldn't forgive my mother for offering me up like a sacrifice on the altar of Elizabeth's success. Chicago was cold and unkind at first. I slept in a friend's cramped apartment on an air mattress that deflated by morning. I worked long shifts at a bakery, my hands cracked from kneading dough, my feet aching from hours on the tile floor. But for the first time, I was free from my mother's shadow. For the first time, every choice, every mistake was mine. I built my life brick by brick. Night classes in business administration, promotions at work, slowly saving enough to rent my own small apartment. Loneliness was my constant companion, but I told myself it was better than betrayal. Better than being reminded every day that I wasn't enough for my own family. Years passed before I let myself fall in love again. His name was Patrick Reynolds. He wasn't like Mark. Where Mark had been charming and smooth, Patrick was steady and thoughtful. He listened when I spoke, remembered the details of my life without me having to repeat them. When he held my hand, it wasn't possessive. It was grounding, as though he was saying, "You're safe here, you're real, I see you." I see. Patrick proposed after 3 years in the middle of a park, with the autumn leaves swirling around us. I said yes, tears streaming down my cheeks, because for the first time since I was a naive 21-year-old girl, I believed in love again. But love doesn't erase scars, it just teaches you how to live with them. When Patrick and I married, we built our life far from my hometown. He knew about my past, at least the parts I could bring myself to tell. He knew my family and I were estranged, that my mother and I hadn't spoken in years, that my sister's name left a bitter taste in my mouth. He respected that silence, never pushing, only offering comfort when the memories cut too deep. And then, nearly a decade after I had run away, my path crossed theirs again. It was my 32nd birthday, and Patrick insisted on throwing me a celebration. "You deserve it," he said, his eyes warm, his smile tender. He invited friends, colleagues, neighbors, people who had become my chosen family in Chicago. The house was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, music drifting from the speakers. For once, I felt surrounded by joy instead of shadows. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone else, but when I opened the door, I froze. There they were, my mother Elizabeth and Mark. Older, polished, still carrying themselves with the same air of superiority that had once crushed me. My mother smiled tightly as though nothing had ever happened. Elizabeth's eyes flickered with curiosity, and Mark looked at me the way a man does when he realizes the past he discarded has bloomed into something he can never touch again. I stood there, stunned, my heart pounding. How did they even find me? Why were they here at my party in the home I had built without them? And then, as Patrick walked into the hallway, sliding his arm around my waist, their faces shifted: shock, disbelief, even a flicker of regret. In that moment, I realized they hadn't come to celebrate me. They had come to measure what I had become without them. And they were unprepared for the answer. For a moment, time froze in the doorway. The music behind me seemed to fade into silence, laughter dimmed into a hollow echo. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, loud and frantic, as if it wanted to claw its way out of my chest. My mother Elizabeth and Mark stood on the threshold of the life I had built, uninvited, unannounced, unwelcome. Patrick's hand tightened gently around my waist, a grounding weight that reminded me I was no longer that trembling girl abandoned in the shadow of her sister's triumph. I was 32 now, a woman forged in fire and rebuilt from ashes. But still seeing their faces, I felt the raw wound beneath the scar. "Hello, Audrey," my mother said, her voice smooth, practiced as though we'd just spoken yesterday. Her eyes flicked past me into the house, taking in the crowd, the laughter, the warmth that didn't include her. "We were in town. Thought we'd surprise you." Surprise? As if the theft of my first love, the fracture of my youth, had been nothing but a misstep easily forgotten. My throat tightened, but words refused to come. It was Elizabeth who broke the silence next. She looked radiant as ever, her hair perfectly styled, her dress understated yet expensive. "You look well," she said, though her voice carried an edge I knew too well. It was the same tone she'd used when we were girls, when she wanted to remind me that no matter what I achieved, she would always be just a step ahead. And then Mark. He hadn't aged poorly, though faint lines creased the corners of his eyes, and his smile carried the weight of years unspoken. His gaze lingered on me longer than it should have, as if searching for the girl he had once loved, the girl he had allowed my mother to strip from his life. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw regret. But regret is a poor companion, it doesn't undo betrayal. Patrick spoke before I could find my voice. His tone was calm, polite, but firm. "This is Audrey's birthday. If you'd like to come in, you can. But understand, you don't get to rewrite history here." My mother's lips thinned. She wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by a man who hadn't grown up under her thumb. Still, she stepped inside her heels, clicking against the hardwood like tiny hammers driving nails into my composure. Elizabeth followed, her perfume filling the air, and Mark trailed last, his eyes never leaving me. As they entered the living room, conversations faltered. My friends, unaware of the history, welcomed them with polite smiles, but I saw the curiosity flicker in their eyes. Who were these strangers who carried tension like a storm cloud into a room filled with celebration? I excused myself from the crowd, leading them into a quieter corner. My chest burned with unspoken words, my hands trembling despite my attempts to steady them. "Why are you here?" I asked finally, my voice sharper than I intended. My mother tilted her head, feigning innocence. "We wanted to see you. It's been too long." "Too long," I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. It's been more than 10 years since you convinced my boyfriend to marry my sister. 10 years since you celebrated my humiliation like it was Elizabeth's coronation. And now you want to act as though nothing happened. Elizabeth flinched slightly at my words, but she quickly recovered, her chin lifting. It wasn't like that, Audrey. You were young, impulsive. Mom thought Mark and I were a better match. I stared at her, incredulous. Better match, he was my boyfriend. I loved him. And you knew that. Mark finally spoke, his voice low. Audrey, I never wanted to hurt you. I was confused. Your mother, she made it sound like what. I snapped. That I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't hold a man's attention, that Elizabeth deserved everything I loved more than I did. My voice cracked, years of buried pain clawing its way out. Silence hung heavy in the air. My mother's eyes hardened, her mask slipping. I did what I thought was best, she said. Elizabeth had the stability, the vision for a family. You were always chasing dreams, running wild. I wanted what was right for Mark, for all of us. For all of us, as though sacrificing me had been some noble act, a gift to the family. My chest heaved, anger mixing with grief. You didn't do it for Mark. You didn't do it for Elizabeth. You did it because you never saw me. You never believed in me. Patrick's hand found mine, his thumb brushing my knuckles. His presence was an anchor, keeping me from being pulled under by the tide of memory. I drew a deep breath, steadying myself. You don't get to erase what you did, I said. My voice calmer now, though laced with steel. You don't get to walk into my life after 10 years and pretend I wasn't shattered by your choices. You made me believe I was disposable. But look around. I gestured toward the room filled with my friends, my colleagues, my chosen family. I built this life without you, and I will not let you ruin it. Elizabeth's eyes shimmered, though whether with tears or anger I couldn't tell. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but my mother's hand on her arm stopped her. Mark shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. The silence stretched until it snapped with Patrick's voice, gentle but firm. It's time for you to leave. My mother bristled. We came all this way. And you've done enough, I interrupted. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 10 years. Leave. For the first time in my life, I saw hesitation in her eyes, as though she realized she no longer held the power she once did. Elizabeth's lips pressed into a thin line. Mark glanced at me one last time, something unreadable flickering across his face before turning toward the door. As they left, the room seemed to exhale, the tension lifting like a storm passing over. I stood there trembling, my chest aching with both relief and sorrow. The confrontation I had dreamed of for years had finally come, but instead of triumph, I felt hollow, drained. Later, after the last guest had left and the house was quiet, Patrick and I sat together on the couch. He held me close, his warmth seeping into me, his heartbeat steady against my cheek. You were incredible tonight, he whispered. I shook my head. I was broken. I still am. He tilted my chin so I would meet his eyes. No, Audrey. You're not broken. You're human. And you're stronger than anyone who tried to tear you down. His words sank into me like balm on raw skin. For the first time in years, I let the tears come, not just for what I had lost, but for the strength I had found. The days after the party felt like waking from a dream I wasn't sure I wanted to remember. My phone buzzed with messages from friends, words of admiration, of solidarity, of disbelief at how I had stood against my mother, sister, and Mark. Yet when the house grew quiet and Patrick left for work, silence wrapped around me like a shroud, and the memories clawed their way back in. I replayed the scene over and over in my mind, the way Elizabeth's chin had lifted in practiced defiance, the way my mother's eyes had narrowed when she realized I no longer bowed to her authority, the way Mark's gaze had lingered heavy with unspoken regret. I had told them to leave, and they had obeyed. That should have been enough. But the ache inside me said otherwise. Late one evening, Patrick found me standing at the kitchen window, staring into the darkness beyond the glass. You're quiet, he said gently, sliding his arms around my waist. I thought it would feel like victory. I admitted, my voice low, facing them, saying what I never had the chance to say. But instead it feels empty. Like I opened an old wound and now it won't stop bleeding. Patrick kissed the top of my head. That's because it wasn't about winning, Audrey. It was about healing, and healing takes time. Time. A word that both comforted and haunted me. Because time was what they had stolen years of it when I should have been building memories free of betrayal. Instead, those years had been filled with proving I wasn't disposable. I began journaling again, something I hadn't done since I left home at 21. At night, when Patrick slept, I'd pour my thoughts onto paper, my handwriting messy and frantic. I wrote letters I'd never send, letters to my mother, to Elizabeth, to Mark. Letters full of the things I had never said, the fury, the sorrow, the small, tender hopes they had crushed. In one letter to my mother, I wrote, "You raised me to believe I was lesser. You made me feel like love was something I had to earn by being quiet, by being small. But I'm not small anymore, and I will never beg for your approval again." In another to Elizabeth, "You weren't just my sister. You were supposed to be my friend. But you let ambition swallow you whole and you devoured me along the way. And to Mark, I loved you. And you loved me too once. But love without courage is nothing. You let fear and manipulation turn you into a stranger. I hope regret keeps you company. It's the least you owe me." The more I wrote, the lighter I felt, as though the ink was pulling poison from my veins. Weeks passed. I didn't hear from them. No calls, no letters, no attempts to explain further. But word travels in strange ways. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years sent me a message on social media. "Your mom's furious. She says you embarrassed them in Chicago." I laughed when I read it, though bitterness tinged the sound. Embarrassed them, as though my entire existence had been an inconvenience, as though I hadn't been the one abandoned, discarded, erased. Patrick urged me not to respond, and I didn't. I owed them nothing. But still, the old longing tugged at me in quiet moments. A part of me still wanted a mother who loved me, a sister who chose me, a family that didn't see me as expendable. That longing hurt more than anger. One evening I sat across from Patrick at dinner, pushing food around my plate. He studied me with patient eyes. "You're carrying something," he said softly. "I don't know how to let it go," I admitted. "They're gone from my life, but they're still inside me. Every cruel word, every betrayal, it's like I swallowed them whole and now they live in my chest." Patrick reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Then let's give them back," he said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Not literally," he explained with a small smile. "But every time you build something good, every laugh with friends, every success at work, every quiet night we share, you're proving they don't own you. That's giving their cruelty back to them. That's refusing to carry it." His words settled over me like a blanket, soothing and warm. Maybe healing wasn't about forgetting. Maybe it was about reclaiming. I began to notice the small victories. The way my colleagues respected me, not for my past, but for my present. The way my friends leaned on me, trusted me, invited me into their lives. The way Patrick looked at me as though I were not just enough, but everything. And yet the past wasn't done with me. 2 months after the party, I received a letter in the mail. My hands shook as I recognized the handwriting, Elizabeth's. I sat on the couch, the envelope heavy in my fingers, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to burn it unopened, to deny her the power of words. But another part, the part still searching for closure, compelled me to tear it open. Inside, her writing flowed in neat, graceful lines. "Audrey, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I wouldn't blame you. But I can't stop thinking about that night. About what you said. You're right, I betrayed you. I told myself I was only following Mom's lead, but the truth is, I wanted what you had. I wanted Mark because he loved you, and I thought if he loved you, he could love me too. But I was wrong. He never looked at me the way he looked at you. Even after we married, I knew that. And now our marriage is falling apart. He doesn't love me, Audrey. He never did." I stopped reading, my chest tight, my eyes burning. My hands trembled as I set the letter down. So there it was, the truth I had suspected but never heard aloud. Elizabeth had stolen, not out of love, but out of envy. And Mark, he had never been hers to keep. He had never been. Patrick found me staring at the paper, my face pale. "What is it?" he asked. I handed him the letter silently. He read it, his brow furrowing. When he finished, he set it aside and took my hands in his. "What do you feel?" I swallowed hard, angry, sad, vindicated, all at once. He nodded. "You don't have to respond if you don't want to. You owe her nothing." I knew he was right. And yet, part of me wondered if Elizabeth's words were an opening not for reconciliation, but for something else. Closure, maybe, understanding, or perhaps just another chance for her to wound me. That night, I lay awake, the letter on the nightstand like a ghost watching me. Elizabeth's confession echoed in my mind. He never looked at me the way he looked at you. I didn't respond to Elizabeth's letter immediately. For weeks it sat on my nightstand, folded neatly but heavy with everything it carried: envy, confession, regret. Some nights I would pick it up, trace the lines of her handwriting, and feel that familiar ache of sisterhood twisted into something sharp. Other nights I ignored it, pretending it didn't exist, though it pulsed in the back of my mind like an old wound that wouldn't close. One evening, after another long day at work, Patrick found me holding the letter again. He sat beside me quietly, his hand warm against my knee. "What are you afraid of?" he asked. "That she'll hurt me again," I whispered. "That I'll let her back in and she'll take more than she already has." Patrick nodded. "That's possible. But maybe this isn't about letting her in. Maybe it's about letting yourself out from under her shadow." His words settled in me like seeds. By the next morning, I made a decision. I wrote a short note. "Elizabeth, I'll meet you. But only once. No more lies." I mailed it before I could change my mind. We met in a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street. I chose the location deliberately: neutral, public, impossible for theatrics. When Elizabeth walked in, she looked tired, as if life had finally etched itself onto her flawless surface. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. She hesitated, then approached, her hands twisting together nervously. "Hi," she said softly. "Sid," I replied, my tone clipped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clatter of dishes and low murmur of conversation filled the silence. Finally, Elizabeth drew a deep breath. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I almost didn't. My eyes met hers, "So make this worth it." Her face crumpled slightly, the confident mask slipping. "I'm sorry, Audrey. Truly. I know I can't undo what I did. I let Mom's words poison me. I wanted to be the perfect daughter, the one she always held up as the example. And when she said Mark belonged with me, I believed her. But I also knew I was taking something from you. I knew, and I did it anyway." The honesty in her voice startled me. For years, I had imagined excuses, justifications, lies. Hearing her admit it so plainly twisted something in my chest. And now I asked bitterly, "Now that your marriage is crumbling, now that you realize he never loved you, now you want my forgiveness?" Tears welled in her eyes. "No," she said. "I don't expect forgiveness. I need you to know that it wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because I wasn't." Her words struck me harder than I expected. All those years I had believed I was disposable, less than replaceable, and here she was confessing her theft had been born not of superiority, but of insecurity. I leaned back, studying her. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders slumped, her hands trembling. "Do you know what it cost me?" I asked quietly. "Leaving home with nothing. Building a life from scratch. Crying myself to sleep, wondering why I wasn't worthy of love or loyalty from my own family. Do you know how many nights I hated myself because of what you and Mom did?" Elizabeth's tears spilled over. "I know," she whispered, "and I hate myself for it." Silence stretched between us, heavy and raw. For the first time, I didn't see Elizabeth, the golden child, the favored daughter. I saw a woman haunted by her own choices, trapped in a life built on betrayal. "I can't forget," I said finally, "and I don't know if I can forgive. But I hear you, and maybe that's the first step." Elizabeth nodded, her expression a mixture of sorrow and relief. We finished our coffee in silence, and when we parted, there were no hugs, no promises of reconciliation. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the truth had finally been spoken. That night, I told Patrick everything. He listened, his brow furrowed, his thumb tracing circles on my hand. "You were brave," he said. "Braver than she deserves. But maybe not for her, for you." He was right. Meeting Elizabeth hadn't healed me completely, but it loosened the chains of bitterness that had bound me for so long. But my mother was another matter. She hadn't written, hadn't called, hadn't shown even a flicker of remorse. I told myself I didn't care, that I didn't need her apology. And yet deep inside, the little girl in me still longed for a mother's love. Weeks later, that illusion shattered for good. I received a call from my cousin. "Your mom's not well," she said. "You should come." I froze. My mother, Eleanor Davis, the woman who had orchestrated my heartbreak, who had molded Elizabeth into her weapon, was in the hospital. Part of me wanted to hang up to shut the door on the past forever. But another part, the part still searching for closure, compelled me to go. When I entered her hospital room, the smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beep of machines filled the air. My mother lay pale against the sheets, her once commanding presence diminished. Her eyes flickered open when she saw me, surprise flashing briefly before her lips tightened. "You came," she rasped. I stood at the foot of her bed, arms crossed. "Don't flatter yourself. I came for me, not for you." She let out a weak chuckle that turned into a cough. "Still sharp, I see." I stared at her, waiting for an apology, an explanation, anything. But she only sighed. I did what I thought was right. Elizabeth was always stronger, steadier. You were too much like me, dreaming, chasing. I didn't want you to waste your life on someone who couldn't handle it. Anger surged in me. "So you destroyed me instead. You convinced my boyfriend to marry my sister. You made me believe I was nothing. That's what you thought was right." Her eyes fluttered shut. "You'll never understand. Mothers make sacrifices. Sometimes they hurt." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "No, Mom. You didn't sacrifice for me. You sacrificed me." The words hung in the sterile air, sharp and undeniable. My mother turned her face away, silent. I realized then that she would never give me the closure I craved. She was too entrenched in her own justifications, too blind to see the devastation she had wrought. I left the hospital with my chest heavy, but my steps lighter. Because I finally understood I didn't need her apology to heal. I didn't need her love to be whole. I had built a life without her, and I would continue to thrive without her. The night after leaving the hospital, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the echo of my mother's words ringing in my ears. Mothers make sacrifices. Sometimes they hurt. But that wasn't sacrifice, it was betrayal wrapped in justification. And I realized she would never see the difference. She would leave this world convinced she had done what was best, while I would live with the shards of what she broke. But as the hours stretched toward dawn, I also realized something else I no longer needed her to see. For years, I had chased an apology that would never come, waiting for her to undo what could never be undone. And all it had given me was chains. That night, in the quiet darkness, I decided to stop waiting. Patrick found me in the morning, sitting by the window, a cup of coffee cold in my hands. He crouched beside me, his eyes searching mine. "You're somewhere far away," he said softly. I shook my head. "No, for the first time I think I'm finally here." He didn't press me, just pulled me into his arms. And in that embrace, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but release. I wasn't holding on to the hope that they would make it right. I was holding on to myself. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice the freedom in small things, how laughter came more easily at dinner parties with friends, how I no longer avoided mirrors for fear of seeing the girl who had been abandoned, how I could speak Elizabeth's name without flinching even if the wound was still tender. One afternoon, Elizabeth called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity or perhaps courage made me swipe the screen. "I heard about Mom," she said quietly. "Are you okay?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. Was I okay? After years of betrayal, after seeing our mother lying in a hospital bed refusing to admit the truth, but instead I just said, "I'm surviving." There was a pause, and then she whispered, "I want to be better, Audrey. I don't know how, but I want to try." Her words hung in the air, tentative and fragile. I didn't promise her anything. I didn't offer absolution, but I didn't hang up either. Maybe that was enough for now, a sliver of possibility, not for what we had been, but for what we might one day become. Patrick and I grew stronger through it all. He had seen me at my lowest, my rawest, and instead of turning away, he leaned closer. "You're not defined by them," he reminded me often. "You're defined by the way you rose from what they tried to bury you under." And slowly I began to believe him. On my next birthday, the house was once again filled with laughter, music, and the people who had become my true family. As I looked around the room, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. Not because the scars were gone, but because they no longer ruled me. I stood to make a toast, my glass trembling slightly in my hand. A year ago, I began my past, walked through that door, and reminded me of every wound I thought I had buried. But tonight, I stand here, not as the girl who was betrayed, but as the woman who survived. Family isn't always the one we're born into, it's the one we build. And I'm grateful to every person here for reminding me that I was never disposable. The applause that followed wasn't loud or grand, it was warm, steady, enveloping. And in that moment, I knew I had reclaimed my story. Now, as I share this with you, I want you to know something. Betrayal does not have the final word. It will wound you, yes. It will break you open, leave scars that ache when the weather changes. But those scars are proof of survival, not signs of weakness. If someone has ever made you feel small, invisible, or unworthy, if they've tried to convince you that you are disposable, hear me when I say this, you are not. Your worth is not defined by their blindness. Your future is not written by their cruelty. You have the power to stand, to rebuild, to create a life so radiant it blinds those who tried to diminish you. I thought I had lost everything when my mother convinced my boyfriend to marry my sister. But what I truly lost were the illusions that their love would ever be unconditional. And in shedding those illusions, I found something greater myself. So take my story as both a warning and a promise. The people who betray you may never repent. The people who wound you may never change. But you can rise anyway. You can choose not to let their shadows smother your light. And if my story has touched you, if it has reminded you of your own strength, I ask you to walk this path with me. Like this video, share it with someone who needs courage today. Subscribe so we can keep building a community where no one feels disposable. And please leave me a comment. I want to hear your story, your scars, your survival. Because together, our voices are louder than betrayal.